Flight 908 had been in the air for a little over 3 hours, gliding smoothly above a blanket of glowing white clouds. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting shades of orange and gold across the sky. Most passengers were relaxed, some reading, some watching movies, others dozing off with the gentle hum of the engines guiding them toward sleep. It was the kind of peaceful moment people imagined when they thought of comfortable air travel, calm, routine, predictable. But fate rarely announces itself before it arrives. Without warning, the cabin lights flickered once almost playfully, then again harder, as if the plane had suddenly passed through a dark electrical wave. A few passengers lifted their heads, puzzled but not yet frightened. Then came the third flicker, sharper, almost aggressive. This time the lights dimmed completely for 2 long seconds before snapping back on. A hush fell over the cabin. That was when it happened. A deep, piercing alarm erupted from the front of the aircraft, a sound so loud, so urgent that every passenger felt it vibrate inside their chest. It was not a sound anyone on a plane ever wanted to hear. Conversations died mid-sentence. People straightened in their seats. Mothers instinctively pulled their children closer. Even the flight attendants, usually the picture of calm professionalism, exchanged quick, anxious glances. One attendant near the front grabbed the intercom phone, her voice trembling as she asked something the passengers couldn't hear. Another rushed toward the cockpit, her steps fast but controlled, as if she knew she had to move without causing panic. But panic was already rising like a cold fog across the cabin. A man in row 9 whispered, "What was that?" His wife tightened her grip on his arm. An elderly woman clutched the rosary hanging from her neck. Someone in the back pressed the flight attendant call button repeatedly, their hand shaking. Then the intercom clicked on. Everyone turned toward the speakers, every breath held, every heartbeat painfully loud. The captain's voice came through. But it wasn't the confident, steady voice people expected from the person responsible for guiding a 70-ton aircraft across the sky. It was fragile, it wavered, and beneath it was something unmistakable fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he paused, breathing raggedly. We've lost both pilots." For a moment the words didn't make sense. People blinked as if they must have misheard. Lost? What did that even mean? Lost consciousness? Lost control? Lost how? Confusion lasted only seconds before the meaning, whatever it truly was, hit everyone with crushing force. A woman screamed. A man shouted, "What do you mean?" Children began crying. The cabin erupted into chaos. Someone yelled, "Is the plane crashing?" Another shouted, "Where are the flight attendants?" People were grabbing their phones, searching for signals, clutching the seats in front of them, as if bracing for impact. The aircraft suddenly felt different, every small vibration too sharp, every sound too loud. The illusion of safety was gone. Now the passengers felt the raw truth. They were suspended miles above the earth, and the people trained to fly the plane were no longer in control. At that exact moment, in seat 14A, a girl with soft brown hair and wide, terrified eyes pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Her name was Rania, 16 years old, traveling alone for the first time. Just minutes earlier, she had been listening to music, lost in her own world, tapping her fingers on the tray table. Now her world felt like it had tilted sideways. The sound of the alarm still echoed in her mind. Her ears rang. She felt as if her body didn't fully belong to her, as if her hands, trembling uncontrollably, belonged to someone else. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs, sharp, fast, almost painful. Lost both pilots, both. How? What does that mean? Her thoughts stumbled over one another in panic. She looked around desperately, and everywhere she turned, she saw fear. A boy younger than her pressed his face into his mother's shoulder, sobbing. A businessman, pale and sweating, stared blankly at the seat in front of him, whispering, "This can't be real." 2 teenagers held hands tightly, their knuckles white, their eyes wet. An old man was trying to calm his wife, but could barely keep his own voice steady. Rania had never seen so many adults crying at once. The flight attendants were doing their best to take control, but even their voices were cracking under the pressure. One of them kept whispering into the cockpit intercom, "Captain, Captain, can you hear me?" Another paced the aisle, trying to comfort passengers, though her own hands shook visibly. The plane jolted lightly and people gasped. Even though the turbulence was minor, it felt different now. Dangerous, as if the aircraft were slowly slipping away from human control. Rania's breathing became shallow. She pressed her fingers against her eyes, trying to focus, trying to think. She didn't know how to fly a plane. Not really. But she knew something, not enough, probably, but something. She had spent hours on flight simulators, reading aviation manuals online, watching cockpit footage, studying emergency procedures out of pure fascination. She never imagined any of it would matter. She never imagined any of it would become real. She looked toward the cockpit door, the place everyone else was terrified to even glance at. It felt miles away. Her mind replayed the captain's words over and over. "We've lost both pilots." Someone had to do something. Someone had to step forward. Someone had to try. She felt her heart pounding so fiercely, she thought she might faint. She wiped her palms on her jeans, swallowed the lump in her throat, and forced herself to breathe deeply, even though her lungs felt tight. If no one else, she thought, if no one else can, maybe I have to. Her legs felt weak as she shifted in her seat, preparing to stand. It felt like the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. She didn't know if she would succeed. She didn't even know if she would make it to the front without collapsing. But she knew this. Doing nothing would mean watching fear destroy everyone around her. Doing nothing would mean hoping for a miracle that might never come. So she gripped the armrest, pushed herself upright, and whispered to herself, "Please don't let me be too late." And with her heart trembling inside her chest, Rania took her first step toward the cockpit, toward the unknown, toward the impossible, toward the moment that would change everything. The cabin of Flight 908 was no longer the calm, floating world it had been moments before. Fear clung to the air like a thick fog, heavy and suffocating. People were whispering, crying, praying, gripping one another as if physical contact alone might save them. The alarms from the cockpit had gone silent now, but the silence that replaced them was somehow even louder. An awful, tense quiet that seemed to press on every chest, making it hard to breathe. The flight attendants moved quickly through the aisles, trying to steady themselves, trying to look composed. But their eyes betrayed them. They were afraid, truly afraid, and when the people trained to stay calm were panicking, everyone knew the danger was real. Then suddenly breaking through the anxious murmurs, one of the attendants shouted, her voice slicing through the cabin like a blade, "Is anyone here a pilot? Anyone, please?" Heads jerked up. Bodies stiffened. Dozens of eyes looked around, searching desperately for someone, anyone, to stand, but seat after seat remained still. No one moved, not a single hand rose. The attendant's voice cracked as she repeated again, louder, more desperate, "We need a pilot. If you have any flight experience, please stand up." Nothing. The cabin was filled with 186 passengers. But in that moment it felt terrifyingly empty, because not one of them could do the one thing that mattered most. Rania felt her stomach twist painfully. Her heart beat so violently she wondered if others could hear it. Her palms were slick with sweat. Her throat felt tight, like it was being squeezed shut. She wasn't a pilot. Not really. She was 16, a school student, a girl who loved aviation and spent hours on flight simulators because the sky fascinated her. She knew how to take off, land, deal with some emergencies in a simulator, not in a real cockpit, not with real lives at stake, not with a massive jet suspended miles above the earth. Her mind screamed at her, "You're not a real pilot. You'll freeze, you'll make a mistake, you'll kill everyone." But another voice whispered beneath it, quiet, trembling, but determined, "Nobody else is standing. Nobody else can even try." She looked at the things around her, the mother holding her sobbing child, the elderly couple clutching hands, the young man shaking uncontrollably, whispering prayers. She saw the fear in every face. She felt it in every breath of stale cabin air. Her chest tightened. If I don't try, we'll all die anyway. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her legs felt like they were made of water. She could barely swallow past the fear lodged in her throat. The attendant's voice rose again, cracking. Is there anyone? Rania closed her eyes. She took one breath, then another, a third, and with every ounce of courage she could summon, she forced her hand upward slowly, shakily, like it weighed 100 pounds. Her voice came out weak, barely audible. She tried again, louder, though her voice trembled. I'm not a real pilot, but I've trained on a simulator. Every head near her turned. Her face burned with fear and embarrassment. She felt naked, exposed in front of hundreds of terrified strangers. She wanted to sink back into her seat and disappear, but she didn't lower her hand. The attendant blinked at her, stunned, then hurried toward her. You've trained? The attendant asked, breathless. Rania swallowed hard. Only on a sim, but I know the basics. I know procedures. I know how to control the aircraft. She paused, her voice cracking. I can try. The attendant's eyes softened, full of both hope and sorrow. We don't have anyone else. Those words hit Rania like a physical blow. She was the only option, the only chance. Her entire body shook as she stood, gripping the seat in front of her for balance. Her knees felt weak, untrustworthy. She could barely feel her legs at all. She was dizzy with fear. Passengers watched her with a mixture of disbelief, desperation, and a strange flicker of hope. Some whispered softly, some cried harder, some stared at her with eyes full of silent prayers. As she stepped into the aisle, a man near her said in a trembling voice, God bless you. A woman whispered, please save us. Another reached out and squeezed her arm gently, as if giving her strength. Rania blinked away tears. They think I can do it, but what if I can't? What if I make things worse? The attendant guided her forward, step by step, row by row. Eyes followed her, every passenger watching the teenage girl who might be their final hope. Rania's heart hammered louder with each step. She felt exposed, like she was walking through fire. She wanted to turn back. She wanted to run. She wanted to fall to the floor and cry, but she kept walking because the alternative, doing nothing, felt worse. By the time she reached the front of the plane, her legs were trembling so hard she had to hold onto the seatbacks just to stay upright. Another attendant waited by the cockpit door, pale and shaken. She's all we have, the first attendant whispered. The second attendant looked Rania up and down her shaking hands, her terrified eyes, her young face, then nodded solemnly. Come with me. When the heavy cockpit door opened, Rania felt a blast of cold air from the room inside. The cockpit was dimly lit, filled with flashing warning lights and blinking panels. The captain and co-pilot lay slumped over unconscious, oxygen masks hanging uselessly beside them. The sight made her stomach drop. This wasn't a simulator, this wasn't a game, this was real, this was life or death. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped inside, her legs nearly buckling under her. Her mind screamed to run, to leave before she made a fatal mistake. The attendant placed a hand on her shoulder. Rania, all these people are counting on you. She turned around. Through the narrow gap in the cockpit door, she could still see the passengers. 186 faces filled with fear, hope, and silent trust. They looked at her like she was already their pilot, and somehow that belief steadied her. Her breathing slowed. Her hands still trembled, but not uncontrollably. Her legs shook, but they held her weight. She turned back to the cockpit, staring at the controls she had only ever touched in a virtual world. I'll try, she whispered. I'll do everything I can. As she slid into the captain's seat, the weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. It felt heavy, terrifying, yet strangely empowering. For the first time since the chaos had begun, the cabin was silent. Every soul on flight 908 held their breath because a 16-year-old girl had just stepped into the cockpit to save them. Inside the cockpit, chaos had a sound, sharp, relentless, deafening. Alarms blared from every direction, red lights flashing across the panels like warning beacons in a burning city. The shrill stall indicator screamed intermittently, mixing with altitude warnings, engine alerts, and the metallic shudder of a plane struggling to stay in the sky. The air felt cold, metallic, and heavy with danger. The moment Rania stepped fully inside, her breath hitched. This wasn't the cozy, simulated cockpit she knew from her computer. This was tighter, darker, more alive, like a living machine crying out in pain. And it was falling, fast. She could feel it in her knees, the slight weightlessness like the small drop before a roller coaster plummets. Only now thousands of feet hung beneath them. She could feel the tilt of the nose. She could sense the loss of stability. The plane was descending too quickly. Her heartbeat surged painfully in her chest. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the pilot's chair and slid into it. The leather was cold, almost stiff, and the captain's headset dangled beside her. For one split second, panic clawed at her. I can't do this. Not here, not for real, but then she remembered the faces in the cabin, the child crying into her mother's chest. The man whispering prayers, the old woman clutching her rosary. They were counting on her, a 16-year-old girl with simulator hours and a terrified heart. She forced herself to inhale deeply. Then she took the controls. The yoke felt heavier than she expected, solid, resistant, vibrating with the aircraft's instability. The engine's deep rumble filled the cockpit, uneven and strained. Her voice trembled as she whispered the steps she knew by heart. Check speed, stabilize the wings, adjust pitch, breathe. Rania, just breathe. Her fingers flew across switches she'd only seen on screens. Throttle slightly forward, nose slightly up, wings level. Don't fight the turbulence, too hard, small corrections, small corrections. The plane groaned as if arguing with her, but she held steady. Rain slammed against the windshield like handfuls of gravel. Wind roared around the fuselage. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance. A storm, of course, there had to be a storm. She swallowed her fear and reached for the radio. The headset felt too large, too heavy, but she forced it on. Her fingers shook as she pressed the transmitter button. Air traffic control, this is a Flight 908. She stuttered, breathless. I'm at the controls. Both pilots are unresponsive. I repeat, both pilots are down. Static crackled. She could hear distant voices chatter. Then a calm, older male voice broke through. Copy that, Flight 908. Who am I speaking with? Rania closed her eyes for half a second. Rania, I'm 16. I'm not a pilot, only simulator experience. There was a long pause. Then the voice returned, steady and gentle. All right, Rania, you're not alone. We're right here with you. Just listen to my voice. You can do this. Something in his tone, firm but full of faith, helped her breathe again. First step, he said, tell me your altitude. She glanced down. The numbers blurred at first. Her eyes swimming with fear. 10,000 and dropping. We're going to slow that descent. Ease the nose up. Gently, no sudden movements. She did. Her hands shook, but she forced the yoke back softly. The aircraft responded with a low moan, stabilizing a little. Good, the controller said. That's excellent. Keep your hands steady. Steady, right, she could try. The storm outside intensified. Raindrops streaked across the glass in chaotic patterns. Thunder rumbled like the sky was splitting open. Her heart pounded faster. Flight 908. The controller said, you're going to need to line up with the runway. I'll guide you in. Just trust me. Rania exhaled shakily. I'm trying. You're doing great, young lady. Better than you think. Outside the cockpit windows, only darkness and rain were visible. A thick wall of clouds made the world look like a swirling gray nightmare. Lightning illuminated the sky for a split second, revealing the faint silhouette of the storm clouds surrounding them. She tightened her grip. Okay, Rania, A to Z continued. Turn 5 degrees left. Slowly. She nudged the controls. The plane resisted at first, then obeyed. That's it. Hold it. Good. Another warning alarm chirped. She flinched, but didn't lose focus. Now watch your speed. Bring it down to 160. Throttle slowly back. The engine's pitch changed. The plane steadied more. Her breathing synced with the movements shakily, but purposefully. And then the first flash of runway lights appeared far in the distance. Tiny, faint, flickering through the sheets of rain. Her heart leaped. I see the runway, she whispered. "That's great news, 908," the controller answered, "but stay cautious. It'll disappear in the storm. Keep your heading. You're lined up." The plane jolted suddenly, violently, tossed by a gust of wind. Rania gasped, gripping the yoke hard. The wings tipped. The aircraft banked dangerously left. Passengers screamed behind the cockpit door. "Easy, Rania," the voice urged. "Counter the roll. Wings level." Her arms strained as she fought against the turbulence. Her muscles burned. Her hands slipped from sweat, but she tightened her grip. The nose dipped again. Altitude numbers spiraled downward. "Pull back slowly. Don't overcorrect." She pulled. The plane trembled, then leveled out. Her breath came in quick, shaky bursts as she steadied the aircraft again. "You're doing incredibly well," the controller said. "Listen to me. You're going to bring this plane home." But the storm only grew fiercer. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it was like flying inside a waterfall. The runway lights flickered out of sight, swallowed by black clouds. I lost visual. Rania cried. "That's okay," the calm voice said. "I have you on radar. Trust my instructions." She tightened her jaw. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Her shoulders ached from tension. Every second felt like balancing on the edge of life and death. "Descend slowly," ATC instructed. "You're almost at glide path." She followed, hands trembling, heart racing. The windshield wipers fought furiously against the torrent of rain. Thunder shook the sky. The storm raged as if guarding the earth below. And then the clouds parted for a brief moment. Just one heartbeat, long opening, revealing the runway lights again. Closer now, brighter, real. Her breath caught in her throat. "There it is," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I see it again. Good," ATC replied. "Keep it centered. You're almost there. Almost, almost." She gripped the controls tighter than ever. The lights grew larger, clearer, more defined. She was guiding a 70-ton aircraft toward safety in a storm with no pilots, with 186 lives behind her and only a trembling voice on the radio to guide her. Rain pounded, wind roared, alarms screamed, but she kept going, and the runway inched closer. The runway rushed toward them, too fast, too bright, too close. Rania's knuckles turned white as she gripped the yoke, her breath trembling in her chest. Every muscle in her body felt stretched, tense, on the edge of snapping. The aircraft shook violently as the storm winds continued to batter it, rain splattering across the windshield like shards of glass. She could barely see the runway lights through the blur of water and the fog of her own fear. "Easy now, flight 908. The voice in her headset said, steady and calm. "Bring her down gently. You're lined up perfectly. Gently, if only it felt possible." The plane's nose dipped. She corrected it. The crosswind pushed them sideways. She countered again. Every second was a fight against the storm, against gravity, against her own shaking hands. Alarms blared, warning lights flashed, but she couldn't look at any of them now, not anymore. Her entire world had narrowed to the stretch of runway racing up toward her, and the terrifying thought that 186 people were counting on a 16-year-old girl. Not to make a mistake, her heartbeat thundered in her ears, her vision tunneled. "Hold your pitch, you hold it now, reduce throttle," ATC instructed. Her hand trembled as she pushed the throttle lever forward, reducing speed. The engines softened, the plane descended, and descended, her breath caught. "Almost there," the voice whispered. "You're doing it." Then wham, the plane slammed into the ground like a giant fist hitting the earth. The impact tore through the cabin with brutal force. Passengers screamed. Overhead bins rattled violently. Luggage shifted and fell. Rania jerked forward in her seat, her entire body jolting from the shock. For a split second she thought she had failed, that the plane had broken, that she had killed them all. But the wheels bounced once, twice hard, and the aircraft lifted for a fraction of a second before slamming back down onto the runway. Her heart nearly stopped. "Steady, keep her straight," ATC urged. She fought the controls, muscles burning. The plane veered slightly left. She corrected it. It skidded on the wet runway. She steadied it. The rain blurred everything, turning the world into silver streaks and flashing lights. And then the nose lowered, the wheels found their grip, the aircraft rolled and rolled and rolled until finally, miraculously, it steadied. Rania felt her breath return in a single, sharp gasp. The yoke vibrated beneath her hands, but no longer violently. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cockpit, a strange silence had fallen, a silence mixed with shocked disbelief and something like hope. She pulled the throttle back, the plane slowed, the world stopped shaking, and Flight 908 against all odds was safe. For a moment no one spoke. There was no cheering, no applause, only stunned, breathless quiet. Then from behind the cockpit door came a single sob. Then another, then a burst of relieved laughter, and suddenly the entire cabin erupted. Voices cried out, broken and grateful. Some screamed in relief, some wept, some whispered prayers through trembling lips. The sound wasn't chaos this time. It was joy, raw, unfiltered, overwhelming joy. Rania's hands slipped off the controls, her fingertips numb. She let herself collapse back into the pilot's seat, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Her arms felt weak, her legs like jelly. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh or faint. Maybe all three, but she was alive, and so was everyone else. "You did it," the voice in her headset said softly. "Young lady, you did it. You brought them home." Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back any more. I was so scared," she whispered. "Heroes usually are," the man said gently. The cockpit door swung open minutes later, and flight attendants rushed in, faces red from crying, eyes wide with disbelief. Two of them pulled her into a hug before she even had time to stand. "You saved us." One whispered, "You saved every single one of us." Passengers behind them craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the girl who had become their miracle. Some held their children close, others pressed shaking hands to their hearts, a few just stood there staring at her with something like awe, like they still couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The emergency vehicles outside moved quickly, lights flashing blue and red against the storm-soaked windows. Firefighters, paramedics, and rescue crews surrounded the aircraft within seconds. When the doors opened, cold night air rushed into the cabin along with shouted instructions and the echo of approaching footsteps. Rania stood slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. The passengers stepped aside as she walked down the aisle. Even those too weak to stand lifted a hand toward her, others clasped their palms together in gratitude. Some whispered blessings as she passed them. At the bottom of the ramp, under the glow of flashing emergency lights, a senior pilot, a man with silver hair and decades of experience, waited for her. He had heard every word of the radio transmissions. He had watched her landing from the control tower. And now he stood there, rain dripping from his hat, uniform soaked, eyes filled with emotion. When she reached him, he didn't shake her hand. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer polite congratulations. He stepped forward, stood straight, and saluted her. A deep, respectful, military-style salute, the kind given only to those who show extraordinary courage. Rania froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Sir, I'm just—" He shook his head. "No." He said firmly, voice deep with sincerity, "Today you weren't a child." He held his salute for one more second, then lowered his hand, leaning closer so only she could hear. "You were the miracle that kept them alive." Her breath broke. Her body trembled. And for the first time since the chaos began, she allowed herself to cry freely. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of what she had done. Firefighters clapped, paramedics nodded in respect, passengers streamed out behind her, many stopping to touch her shoulder or whisper a thank you. She had landed a jet in a storm with no co-pilot, no captain, no experience beyond a simulator. She had done the impossible. As she stood on the rain-soaked runway, surrounded by flashing lights, grateful faces, and the roar of emergency vehicles, one truth washed over her stronger than any storm. She had saved 186 lives. A miracle, a hero, a legend born in the sky, and though she was only 16 that night, the world saw her for who she truly was, the girl who refused to give up. The girl who fought the storm, the girl who brought them home, the miracle of Flight 908, the miracle in the sky. The moment the wheels struck the runway, the entire aircraft jolted with such force that every passenger felt their heart leap into their throat. The plane bounced violently once, then again, each impact shaking the cabin like a thunderclap rolling through metal walls. Screams erupted, hands clutched armrests, prayers spilled from trembling lips, and some couldn't even bring themselves to look out the window. In the cockpit, Rania's breath hitched, but she held onto the controls with every ounce of strength left in her trembling fingers. She whispered to herself, "Hold steady, please," and pushed the yoke forward just enough to regain alignment as the third contact with the runway finally steadied the aircraft. The wheels locked on, friction roaring beneath them, and she applied the brakes as she had practiced hundreds of times in her old simulator game. But never like this, never with real lives depending on her. The aircraft slowed, metal groaning, rain smearing across the windshield, the engines whining as they powered down. Then, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the plane came to a gentle rolling stop. For a second, nobody spoke. It was as if the entire cabin was afraid that the slightest noise would break whatever miracle had just occurred. Then the silence shattered, first with gasps of disbelief, then with applause that built into a thunderous wave of emotion. Passengers cried openly, hugging strangers, thanking God, thanking fate, thanking the universe for the teenager who had somehow saved them all. Flight attendants rushed toward the cockpit, their voices cracking as they called her name, not with fear this time, but with awe. Rania sat frozen, her hands still gripping the controls, unable to process that the nightmare was over. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a scared girl who just wanted her mom. Yet when the cockpit door opened and she stepped out, the entire cabin erupted in cheers so loud it echoed down the jet bridge outside. People reached out to touch her hand, their eyes shimmering with gratitude. Some knelt to thank her. Some simply whispered, "You saved my child, you saved my family, you saved us." Rania felt her throat tighten, tears spilling before she could stop them. She had never felt so exhausted, so overwhelmed, or so alive. As she reached the aircraft door, the storm had softened into a light drizzle, and flashing emergency lights reflected off the wet tarmac. Dozens of paramedics, airport security officers, and fire crew stood waiting, but what stopped her in her tracks was the sight of a senior commercial pilot, a man with decades of flying behind him, standing at attention, saluting her with the solemn respect reserved for the bravest of aviators. He approached her slowly, his eyes reflecting both disbelief and admiration, and said in a voice thick with emotion, "Today you were not a child. Today you were the miracle that kept them alive." Rania didn't know how to respond. Her breath trembled, and all she could do was lower her gaze, shy and overwhelmed, as he gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "What you did," he continued, "is something even trained pilots fear. You stayed calm in a sky that tried to break you." Behind them, passengers were still crying, still thanking her, some unable to walk properly because their legs were shaking from the fear they'd endured. Cameras flashed as airport crew documented the emergency landing, but none of that mattered to Rania. All she cared about was the soft, stunning reality settling into her heart that she had done the impossible. Reporters would later call it the miracle in the sky. Aviation analysts would replay the flight data in disbelief. Millions around the world would hear about the 16-year-old girl who saved 186 lives. But in that moment, standing barefoot on the cold runway, rain mixing with her tears, Rania wasn't thinking about fame or headlines. She was thinking about every terrified heartbeat she had felt behind her, every voice that had whispered prayers, every soul that was breathing now because she hadn't given up. And as she looked back at the giant aircraft she had somehow brought safely to Earth, she exhaled a shaky breath and whispered the only words that made sense, "Thank you for trusting me." The senior pilot smiled softly. as if he knew exactly what she meant, and replied, "No, Rania, thank you for bringing them home."